This first article I have for you is Kentucky schools want fewer white teachers. You have the superintendent or assistant superintendent, William Black, being quoted as saying, "We are not diverse as we want to be." This is Paducah Public Schools wanting to make all of its students more comfortable in the classroom by making sure there are less whites. It says there are still some whites that aren't dead or fled, and here's why that's a problem. The school says it can do better with one of the most diverse student populations in the state. To do that, they want to diversify staff and administrators. Mr. Black, the superintendent, said our student body is amongst the most diverse in the state. Here's a photo or a clip of some of the diversity in one of their schools. It's the typical mumbo-jumbo stuff. We want our students to see teachers and staff members from backgrounds and ethnicities similar to theirs. One of the issues that he's talking about is basically you have a lot of these qualified white teachers in black neighborhoods because they're the most qualified, and they don't like that. It's kind of like when they're bitching about in Ferguson where there's not enough white cops, or there's not enough black cops, it's mostly white, because they can't get enough of their own African Americans to step up to the plate and start policing their communities. Black says for the past 20 years the district has been trying to make the school's staff and administration more diverse, but it's still not where it wants to be. And we hear these types of quotes over and over again by high ups in the academic world, university levels, presidents and that, saying, and mayors saying that they're not diverse enough, they're not where they want to be. That means less white people. That's basically code word for that. Interesting. So he actually admits that most races like to be amongst their own, which we've covered before in a poll that whites admitted that they want to be around other whites, and that most races inherently, genetically, subconsciously, self-segregate. He says psychologically and socially we identify more closely with authority figures who look like people in their home environment. Then we move on to this article from American Renaissance, or AMREN. Race and class collide in a plan for 2 Brooklyn schools. Basically, they have an issue of overcrowding. It seems like it's at one of these predominantly non-white schools, and the way to fix that is how they've done it in other ways in the past, which is to move them into white schools. One resident said, "We fought hard to build this school, and we're not going to just let people come from outside when we worked so hard and dedicated ourselves." So one of these communities was talking about the other community's low test scores and asked what kind of training and resources the teachers would receive to make the education there comparable to what they have at the other school. He said here that the department is downplaying what he called the academic challenges. He says that they were severely underperforming. I don't want to be the bad guy in the room, but no one else wants to talk about it. PS 307's population is 90% black and Hispanic, and 90% of the students receive some form of public assistance. Its state test scores, which are below the city-wide averages, are closer to the average for black and Hispanic students. About 20% of its students passing math tests and 12% passing the reading test this year. And then you have at this PS 8, whose population is almost 60% white, with only 15% receiving assistance. Scores are considerably above the city averages. Almost 2/3 of its students passed each test. So you have this one individual talking about gentrification. He says that the residents who oppose the rezoning aren't racist. They aren't people who don't want to be with other races and other cultures. He said they just don't want to be in a ghetto. They don't want to be in a school where everybody's poor and their kids is the only white kid or Asian kid. But the truth is you don't want to be the only Asian or white kid in a predominantly black school. You can get tortured, beaten on the bus, in class, outside class. It's not good, so. But at least he admits that. And you gotta love this one, based off some kind of study that was published by the Journal of Racial and Ethnic Health Disparities. So you know where they're going to go with this, which is basically white men have less stress and are more prone to depression because of it. So they have less stress because of their white privilege and are more prone to depression because of their guilt. So he says here it speaks volumes about white privilege. The world treats white men well, so well in fact that infrequent negative life circumstances mentally harm them. Then we have this. Study finds students underperform in schools with large black populations. Is it because they're dumb? Is it because they don't try? No, it's because of discrimination. It's because of the color of their skin. So it's a racial achievement gap. So they're being victimized. That's the problem. So they were actually talking about something, some issue I wasn't aware of, but resegregation of the nation's public schools, and that's how all the zoning goes, where basically it's mostly white students in white areas because of zoning laws and that. But it is funny though, isn't it? How like they like to you don't see white students going into like the ghetto or something, or just a black area. I'm not saying that all black areas are ghettos. I'm just saying that you don't see whites flocking or using policy and activism and all this stuff to force their way into, non-white schools. It just doesn't happen. But you do see the opposite, which is non-whites being forced into white schools. In fact, you actually have the law on their side too, because and I believe it was in Portland, Oregon. But basically, what they did was they didn't allow white students to transfer. They said something about the title was scrap transfers for white students. Basically, they're not going to let them move out of the school because they take that money with them, and they don't like that. So they say here that racial isolation or the resegregation of the schools is going in a direction that is not good. Not good for who, right? It's not good for anyone. They say, well, it's good for white people, but that doesn't matter because we don't exist. It says here, and if we did exist, then we're bad and more basically inherently evil, and so we deserve whatever we get. I mean, this is the ideology of anti-whites. You have to remember that our mere existence offends people. It offends all races, whites existing. So the goal for them is to set the narrative that we don't exist and completely erase us from the present and from history. Ultimately, in the future, for the future, right? White genocide. But it's like I mentioned in that video that I made, the last white person interviewed, they said, well, eventually, when we're all gone, they won't be able to blame anybody else for their shitty situations. So that's something positive to look at. So yeah, it's our fault that they're underperforming in test scores. It has nothing to do with genetics, has nothing to do with their culture. It says here, white female principal wins case of racial discrimination by blacks. So this is a huge victory, and I agree completely with what Daily Stormer said, the author Andrew Anglin. He said that this wouldn't have happened if it was a male. It was only because it was a female, and that's usually how it is. But they awarded $370,000 in damages to a white school principal who alleged black administrators racially targeting her and created a hostile work environment that forced her to resign. So it says here the jury composed 3 black women, 2 black men, and 3 white men. So there you go. Yeah, being discriminated by other white men. That's what's so sad. And they say if it would have been more whites amongst them, she probably would have lost the case. It's funny because I keep seeing these articles coming out about discrimination in the education system against whites, and ironically, I am working on a screenplay. I don't know if I've ever sold one or anything like that. It's more of just trying to get the craft down. But I think this one might be the one, and it's called Diversity Road, and it's about an anti-racist woman. She's famous, she's wrote a book and everything, and she basically drags her family into a predominantly black neighborhood, takes up their principal position and gets discriminated against. There's a lone white student who gets beat up, nothing happens, he becomes a mass shooter. So this is something that hopefully we can get out there, more of this type of information which is going on here. I don't think a script like that is going to get through Jew Hollywood, but you never know. All about building racial awareness among whites so that they can start thinking like a group, start looking out for each other as a group. Powers that be like us to think as individuals all the time. And when whites are thinking racially as a group, we pose a big threat to Jews who like to exploit us basically one at a time, isolate us from each other. So maybe people will see a movie like that, and there'll be people that have taught or were principals or superintendents will be like, wow, I've actually experienced this. Now finally there's something coming out that's just not pure propaganda, which is what we see. Here you go. A white teacher threatened with rape by a black student was hit with a disciplinary charge. So a Long Island high school teacher who was threatened with basically rape by a student claims in a lawsuit that she was retaliated against by school officials for reporting the threat to authorities. This was Lynn Albuquerque, a science teacher, alleged that the backlash was racially motivated because she is white. When I get done ramming you, I'm going to bag your daughter, then ram the bitch through the whole gang. Next up, Pennsylvania teen girl tried to set school security guards on fire. Again, another idea. I keep getting ideas. My mom was a teacher at a predominantly black school, and she told me that her students stole her cell phone. So it's just another idea to incorporate in my script. So here you go. Here's another one, because I wrote about the security guards. This girl tried to set the security guards on fire. So I can just go to reality to find ideas. This isn't made up or science fiction. You know, like Hollywood portraying, you know, the biggest threat in America is, you know, Nazi terrorist, white supremacist terrorist. It's a bunch of shit. And they get a Jew to play, Daniel Radcliffe, to play this FBI infiltrator of a Nazi group in a new film. Which is, again, interesting. I'm not making this crap up. Just like 2 weeks ago, I came up with an idea where there would be an FBI infiltrating some kind of nationalist group in America, but he would actually start to empathize with them, and he would go to the dark side and actually join them once he realized what they were actually talking about and what they represented. And yes, another idea for my movie, right? Because the son, he's a football player, right? So this is what's going to happen to him when he goes to play in the, you know, with the black football players at the new school, the diverse school, right? A black football player rips helmet off white player and clubs him with it. It's not the first case. It's happened before too. So, but it has nothing to do with race. These are just, you know, NFL thugs or, you know, football thugs. They pose a question here at Ameren: does white identity mean white supremacy? Well, it doesn't. But that's how they like to label us. But those labels are starting to break down. The more reality sets in with most white people. So, no, it doesn't mean supremacy. It just means identity. That's the goal. Build racial identity in whites again. You look at some of the clips, there were people protesting back in the 50s because they saw what was coming. The forced busing and all that, force integrating in blacks into white schools. See the pictures of racially aware white men with their sons out there protesting, you know, yelling, screaming, almost getting violent. But luckily we have a Pennsylvania state representative who actually explains the difference between a white supremacist and a white nationalist. I'm sure it'll fall on deaf ears, but it's good news for everyone. His name is Daryl Metcalf. He's a Republican from Cranberry. And it says here he created a story on Thursday when he asserted on the House floor that a white nationalist is a lot different than a white supremacist, and appeared to defend having invited a man with alleged white nationalist ties to testify before a state government committee earlier this week. He said, "I'm a duly elected member of this body. My statements were ignored, silenced, and disrespected." He responded by saying Thursday that the hearing had been unfairly maligned in an email from the Southern Poverty Law Center identifying one of the speakers as an alleged white supremacist, Metcalf said. He said, "A white nationalist is a lot different than a white supremacist." This was all about him responding to comments by Leslie Acosta, a Democrat from Philly. It looks like a Mexican female who said she felt silenced unfairly in Metcalf's state government committee Monday during a hearing on a bill to make English Pennsylvania's official language. So it says here, I think it's a total distortion and a smear on behalf of the SPLC, and unfortunately, they have to resort to name-calling. So this was from Bob Vandervoot, who testified at the Monday hearing ahead of the Pro-English, which is identified as a nativist extremist group. And when asked about the characterization, he says he does not consider himself a white nationalist. So in conclusion, they're basically saying you're a white supremacist if you want people to speak English when they come to America. Top Muslim says right-wing extremists are a bigger threat than refugees, claims 1 in a million chance of jihadists in a crowd of 10,000 Syrians coming to U.S. And a rabbi says Jews should renounce whiteness and double down on anti-racism. Jewish supremacist groups such as the SPLC, like we just covered in the ADL, are all about promoting Jewish interests and are heavily anti-racist or anti-white. It says Jews in America struggled for decades to become white. Now we must give up whiteness to fight racism. Let's teach our children that we are, in fact, not white, but simply Jewish. In a sense, he's saying being Jewish is clearly something important, an identity worthy of celebration and praise, but being white is racism, so that's bad. This is Race for Survival at race4survival.com. Thank you.